Hi everyone, thanks again for joining us today and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Lindsay Teal and I'll be your host for today's session, which we're thinking should last around 40 to 45 minutes. I'm joined here today by my colleague at Resource Efficient Scotland, Emma Berry. Now Emma's one of our expert implementation advisors and has worked with organisations across Scotland to help them implement successful environmental policies, so she'll be best placed to give us lots of great advice today. I'm also joined by Fran Goldie from the Supplier Development Programme, which of course we're delivering today's webinar in partnership with. So I'll hand over to Fran in just 1 second to give a little bit more information about Supplier Development Programme. But before that, just a little bit of housekeeping. You'll see on screen now that there's a questions panel. So if during today's session you would like to ask Emma, Fran or myself a question about anything we're covering, then you can just type your question into the box that you see on screen there. And those questions will come to myself and we'll stop at 2 points throughout today's session to put those questions to Emma, and we'll try and answer as many as possible. If you have a Twitter account and you like to tweet, then you can also tweet your question to ResWebinar hashtag at ResourceScot, and we should be able to pick up those questions there and put them to Emma as well. Okay, so I'll now hand you over to Fran, who will just talk to you for a couple of minutes about SDP.
Good morning everyone, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and hopefully you'll get lots out of this session. You'll be aware that the SDP programme itself delivers free training to ensure that you're able to find, win and continue to work with public sector. We need you to be bidding and winning contracts. Historically, the programme has been on a face-to-face classroom style event training where you would go along and an expert on procurement would impart his knowledge and bring you up to speed with the ever-changing landscape that is procurement. But due to additional funding we've secured from DSBET, which is Digital Scotland Excellent Business Partnership, we're now able to embark on digital training, which is fantastic for companies and small businesses that may be in rural areas and not able to attend a face-to-face, or perhaps just your company has limited resource and time. Hopefully this style of learning will suit you, but both styles will complement each other. Please feel free to attend any of our face-to-face sessions, which you will find on the calendar, and also the webinar which Resource Efficient Scotland are delivering for us today. I'll hand you back over now to Lindsay and Emma. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks Fran. Okay, so over to Emma, who's going to run our webinar today.
Hi, thanks everybody for joining today. So start with just the agenda and what we'll be going through today. We'll start with a summary of environmental policy, then go on to preparing a policy, the aspects and impacts that go to make up your policy, then a wee bit of aims and objectives, SMART targets, and then if you do feel that it is appropriate for your organisation, onto environmental management systems. So to start with, I'll give you a brief summary of environmental policy. Environmental policy is a written statement which is outlining your organisation's commitment to managing the environmental impacts of its operations. Now, it's not a big document, it's approximately 1 side of A4. We don't want it much more than that because it needs to be concise, it needs to be there for organisations to use. It's also not a static document, so it should be updated when anything changes in your organisation or if you feel that something's not been particularly covered in it. It needs to be easy to understand, so not full with jargon, basically so anyone that comes into your organisation or anyone that accesses it off your website so that they can understand just exactly what you mean by it. And also, environmental policies are typically produced as part of an environmental management system, but especially for SMEs and smaller organisations, it's perfectly fine being a standalone document. So basically an environmental policy can help you to understand better what your environmental impacts are of your organisation and basically help to reduce these. So it's also good as well to demonstrate to your staff and also externally that you are looking at these things and what you are hoping to achieve with it. So why should you produce an environmental policy for your organisation? Well, I mean, the first thing could be customer or client pressure. It could be that when you are looking for a new service or when you're talking to other customers or clients, that these are requests that are coming in. Why haven't you got an environmental policy? Have you thought about putting an environmental policy together? We've done some work with organisations that actually got in their tender process that they don't work with clients or they don't work with other organisations that don't have environmental policies in place. So it's quite an important thing, and it doesn't take that much time or effort to do. Next one here is tender requirements. So I presume that's kind of why the majority of the people have dialed in today, because that's one thing that Supplier Development Programme helps with, and it's either a requirement in tenders that you're going for, or it'll help to boost your scores if you can say that you have an environmental policy. Associated legislation, compliance. Basically, it's another way that you can tick the box to make sure that you are actually compliant with the associated legislation, whether that is something surrounding energy or whether it's the Waste Scotland regulations. It just reminds you that that's there. Remaining a sustainable competitive business. Again, this can be something that will highlight it to your staff that you're focusing on this, or it could be external. And again, it shows that you are addressing these issues and making sure that it is something that your organisation it's important to them. So now to the first poll, I'll hand you back over to Lindsay.
So just to give us an idea where everybody's at, we just want to ask whether or not you currently have an environmental policy. So coming on screen now, you should see the poll, and basically we just want you to let us know whether or not you do currently have an environmental policy, or whether perhaps you do but now it's out of date, or you've never had one, or you're not quite sure. And I think that will just give Emma a steer to where everybody's at just now. So we've got the results coming in just now. So I'll just close that poll and share the results with you. And that should be coming on screen now. So hopefully everyone can see those results. So we've got 50% of people do not have an environmental policy in place at the moment. So obviously today's session is hopefully going to be able to enable you to go away and do that straight away. 33% of people do have one, but they're feeling that it's out of date. So again, this should be extremely beneficial. And 17% of you do currently have one. So hopefully you might be able to identify some opportunities to add to that today as well. So I'll just take that poll off your screen now and hand the slides back to Emma.
That's great, that's some good results, and hopefully we will be able to help today. So to prepare an environmental policy, we start with just looking at a brief description of what your organisation's activities is. Now this is something similar to what you would have on your website, maybe in the About Us section, just a few sentences to sort of clarify what it is you actually do as an organisation. From that, then we go on to identify the organisation's significant environmental impacts, and then with that information we'll then build to show commitment to sort of legal compliances, your aims and objectives, your continued improvement, depending on your type of organisation, maybe pollution prevention, and then all those things will have like the targets that you're aiming to focus on. So the first thing that you'll want to do when you're starting to write or maybe even updating your environmental policy is actually identify your aspects and impacts of your organisation. So this really just creates what you're wanting the policy to focus on. So for environmental aspects, that is defined as an element of an activity or a service that can interact with the environment. And an environmental impact is any change to the environment, whether adverse or beneficial, wholly or partly resulting from a community's activities or service. Now, it says adverse or beneficial, but most of the time that it's focused on or it's included in an environmental policy, it normally is an adverse effect in some form. So if you use an example of, say, company driving, then the environmental aspect would be the CO2 that's released into the atmosphere when company mileage or company driving is taking place, and the actual environmental impact that comes from that would be in a large-scale global warming. So that just gives you a kind of idea of what some examples could be. So going into this in more depth and how to actually identify your aspects, think about your organisation on a standard day or standard week. What are the things that are actually happening? So select an area, a department, depending on the size of your organisation. It could be your office, and then identify what the actual activities are that are occurring. From that, you'll go to look at the associated aspects of each of these activities. So again, it could be company driving, like the example that we showed before. So now that you've got your aspects, from those aspects identified, you can look at your impacts. So these can be things like air pollution, natural resource depletion, landfilling, even things like odour and noise. It does depend what kind of organisation you are, but I'm sure if you look at that list, you can see that even in a small scale, your organisation does contribute to some of these things. And that's basically what your policy will focus on reducing, and what kind of things your policy will include. So here are some more examples that we've got here. So again, vehicle emissions, the impact of that would be global warming, waste generation, disposal of waste to landfills. It's all basically trying to get you to think about things that you could include, and things that if you improve will improve your organisation's sort of environmental credentials almost. So just a few more examples to give you some food for thought. The activity for the first one, washing down a waste lorry. The aspect of that is the release of the contaminated water that has been used when you wash down that lorry, and the impact would be pollution of the water course. Again, if that water is just running off straight into the drain. Same for the second one, the activity is spray painting. The aspect of that is emissions of the solvent to the air, and then the impacts global warming and ozone depletion. So again, these might not be completely relevant to your organisation, but it just gives you an idea of the kind of things that can be included. So I always like to include this example because it is relevant to near enough every organisation. Every organisation photocopies, every organisation has a printer, and it just shows things that can be changed really, really simply. So the activity here is photocopying a document. So you've got your original document, and then you've got your copy of your document. The inputs, or the things that are required, is the toner, the printer and electricity. And what is happening, or what is the processes from this photocopying of the document, is there's been noise being produced from the photocopier, there is spent toner cartridges from the printer, and there's waste paper from a photocopying error. So if you look at this activity, what can actually be mitigated here? Well, you can check, do you actually need a photocopy of that document? Because if you don't need a photocopy of that document, then the whole thing is void. There's no requirement for any of that noise, for any of that waste paper, for any of that ink that's getting used. So that's you taking out that process, and that's one less thing that is required. But the other thing that you can check is the document correct when you are photocopying it? Because if it is required, then as long as it's the correct document, then you don't have any waste paper from an error. So it's just to sort of put it into perspective and give it a more sort of simple sort of example of what can be achieved when you start like looking into things. And although it's not completely relevant to an environmental policy, it just gives another example. And my final example is showing that one activity can have multiple aspects, and then that aspect can also have multiple impacts to the environment. So transport as an activity can have an aspect of the truck cleaning, which we've discussed before, so it's like the runoff to the water course and also the water consumption that's actually getting used. But then the other side of things can also be the fuel consumption and the global warming. So once you start looking at things, you do see that it does have multiple aspects and then multiple impacts, even if it is just as simple as, I mean, that doesn't need to be truck cleaning, that could just be a company car, and it's got the same kind of aspects as well. So now I'm going to hand back to Lindsay to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions come in, but do take your time to pop some into the questions box if you do have them. It's a good opportunity to get all that knowledge from Emma. But the questions that we've got so far, I'll just put to Emma. One of the first ones actually is someone's asking whether or not the slides will be available after the webinar, so just let you know that they will be, and I'll send them round in the next couple of days. So one of the first questions is, how frequently should we update our environmental policy?
I mean, there's no specific rule for this about when environmental policies should be updated, but as I said before, it's not and it shouldn't be a static document. It shouldn't be that once you've put together or created your environmental policy that it just remains there. It should be updated when you feel that it's required or when business needs or business activities change. But again, that's all down to type of organisation you are, but
would you suggest like an annual review? Or?
Definitely an annual review, but if you feel that anything changes more frequently than that, feel free. But as long as you keep a record of your past environmental policies on your network or on your computer, then, but yeah, an annual review.
Okay, brilliant. The next question is, someone's asking, do you have, I don't know if you're going to touch on this a little bit later, but if you have an EMS, does it need to be accredited to a standard such as an ISO 14001?
No, definitely not. I mean, it's up to your specific organisation whether you look to accredit your environmental management system or not. But I mean, your starting point is your environmental policy. And if you feel that it would be beneficial to go on to an environmental management system and then to go on to say accredit it to ISO 14001, there's definite benefits to that, but there is a lot of time and cost implications as well. So if you've got your EMS in place, that's great, but it doesn't necessarily need to be accredited. No.
Okay. Fantastic. Someone's asking, do you have an example environmental policy that you can share?
Yeah, we'll have a link at the end of the webinar actually of the Resource Efficient Scotland webpage that's got some information on environmental policy, and in that there's, I think, a checklist of what should be included. There is a couple of environmental policy examples as well, and even if it's not something that's kind of what your organisation is, at least it will show you how maybe it can be laid out and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's examples which we'll share.
Brilliant. And I think we'll just squeeze in one more question. Someone's saying that they want to include objectives about engaging staff, but they're struggling to think how they can make these measurable. But I think, I know that you are going to go on and talk about this a little bit more, but you might want to touch on it now.
So it is a difficult one, as you say. I think it's all surrounding data and what information you actually have in place, and as you said, we will go into that in a bit more detail, but as long as you have the data prior to your sort of staff engagement or your campaign, and then you continue to measure that when you're going through. You should be able to measure it, yeah.
Okay.
So things like maybe introducing a new recycling system to an office, or I don't know, switch off campaign, as long as you're taking the meter readings and as long as you have the data before, and then you can see the changes that are happening,
Okay.
you should be able to attribute it.
It all lies in the data, which you'll touch on later. Okay, thanks. We'll move on, and that's all the time we've got for questions just now. But yeah, do take your time to pop them in if you want to have some more questions answered at the end.
Okay, so now that you've got an idea of some of the aspects and impacts that can be found in organisations and some things that you can focus your environmental policy on, we will now look at sort of setting aims and objectives and what could be appropriate. So an aim is a broad statement of what you want to achieve. So some example aims are, our aim is to improve our resource efficiency to meet and exceed legislative targets, or quite a popular one, our aim is to be carbon neutral. So aims are meant to be inspirational, they're meant to sort of get everyone in your organisation sort of behind them and make sure that they are up for the challenge, but they also should be grounded in reality, because there's no point setting something for your organisation that you know that you've got no hope in achieving, because it's not good for morale and it's not good for the business as a whole if you're setting this aim that you know that you're not going to achieve. So an objective sits under the aim, and there can be multiple of these, and that is a specific statement of actually what you want to achieve. So no ambiguity in it. It's got to be defined and it's got to be really specific so that you understand what it's got to allow you to be able to achieve that sort of overarching aim. So here's some examples. Reduce waste by 10% for the next 5 years, or reduce energy consumption by 20% by 2018. So again, you can have multiple ones of these that will say to make sure your company achieves carbon neutral. So I don't know if you have come across SMART targets through other parts of your organisation, but what we normally sort of like to focus on is all objectives that are created and for environmental policy, or even for something else that's surrounding an organisation, should be SMART. Now SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time bound. So specific, don't be vague, make sure that what you are wanting is clarified in the terms. So I've got some examples here. So the first one, it's quite a vague statement. We want to improve our environmental credentials. It doesn't really give you much detail about what the organisation is wanting to do. It's quite an empty statement, albeit good, but not something that you want as an objective. So the second one down, we aim to reduce our carbon footprint by 2015. It's slightly better as it's got a specific outcome, but it still doesn't have that much information there. And the third one down is what we would call a specific and SMART target. So it's our goal is to reduce electricity consumption by 5% by 2015 from a 2010 baseline. So again, it's got all the information there. It's making sure that it's got what data it's using, it's got how much you want to reduce the electricity consumption by, and it's got a date. So it's a good target there. Second one down is measurable. So think about how you want to measure success before you start. you can't actually make an objective unless you have the data to measure it and to back it up. So if you don't have that information, or if you don't have that data, you've got no way to show the progress that you've made, or even to evaluate the success of what you've done. So a way to do this is through baseline information. So think about the information that you have, think about the data that you have for your organisation, or maybe it's not you that has it, maybe it's someone else in your organisation that you can get sort of past bills, or maybe you know that they take meter readings but you don't know where they store them. So you need to talk to colleagues and make sure that if you're wanting to focus on a specific area, that you have the data to back that up. So things like water, if you know that your water isn't metered, then there's absolutely no point in making an objective that looks at tracking or reducing your water use, because it's kind of an empty objective, because you've got no way of tracking or evaluating the progress that you're making. Even if you do sort of add hippos to your toilets and different things like that, it's not you're not going to have that data to see the benefit that's happening. Things like gas and electricity usage, that information you'll get from bills, so that's a good starting point. But again, if you know that there has been meter readings taken, then that's even better, and it's more accurate for your needs. It can also be beneficial as well for you to check your bills, so make sure that your bills and your meter readings tie up, so it's like a win-win there for that, because you can see if there's any mistakes. Other things that you can use baseline data for, or you can measure, is maybe paper usage, company mileage, even recycling, anything that you get an invoice for, or there's any kind of expenses. So say with paper usage, you could do it with your accounts for how many reams of paper are brought in per amount of time. So it's things that you can think about, but the main thing is you need to take stock of what information you have and what you can access before you start to set your objectives, because there's no point in having an objective that you can't measure going forward. So another thing that is beneficial after your baseline is also key performance indicators, especially if your organisation is subject to change. So a key performance indicator is performance information that enables an organisation to understand whether or not they are on track or whether they are improving. So it's basically like it provides a comparison from so the example below is a good example of why you would need a key performance indicator. So two bits of information there are: in 2010 a company consumed 60,000 kilowatt hours, and in 2013 that same company consumed 75,000 kilowatt hours. So in that information there's nothing saying if that company's improved, if that company's increased its energy usage or anything. It's quite vague information, but if they had, say, a key performance indicator like per staff member, or so the ones we've got there are waste to landfill and percentage recycling per tonnes, or water used per member of staff. So per members of staff will allow you to show fluctuation in numbers. So if you've got temporary staff in, or if you've got seasonal staff, say it's a hotel, or some kind of hospitality that does fluctuate in staff. Other ones there are per floor area. So again, it depends if you're trying to compare two sites, but one site is double the size than your other site. Other key performance indicators include sort of per unit of production, which will account for if you've got times that you've got peaks in production, and it just helps sort of clarify what the changes are. So if we go back to the example from the slide before, where it said in 2010 the company consumed 60,000 kilowatt hours of energy, that was actually only for 10 staff, so that accounts as 6,000 kilowatt hours per member of staff. But in 2013, when we only had the information that they upped their usage to 75,000 kilowatt hours, they've actually increased their staff numbers to 15 staff, so it's actually only 5,000 kilowatt hours per staff. So it shows that they have done something, and they have decreased their per staff energy usage. But from the example before, when you've only got the sort of the date and how much their altogether usage is, then you don't have that information. So it's where key performance indicators really do provide a benefit and allow that extra bit of information that it gives it more clarity. So next one, it's probably quite a common sense point, but achievable. Don't set objectives that you can't hope to meet. It's the same with what I said about the aim at the beginning. Nobody likes to not meet targets or to lose out on things, so you don't want to set an objective for your organisation that you know is not achievable. It's not good for morale, and it's not good for the business as a whole. One way that you can make sure that you're setting realistic and achievable targets is to use published benchmarks. So these will allow you to make sure that you are trying to set an achievable sort of target almost for your organisation, and these cover areas from energy use to paper use to waste, water, and it, along with making sure that it's comparable to your organisation, you can also use that information to compare it to, say, an office of similar size or a manufacturing facility that maybe doesn't manufacture the same things, but it has things in common, so that they are quite helpful as well. And next one, relevant. Will your objectives actually help to meet your aim? Now, there's no point choosing objectives that aren't relevant or actually counteract your aim or even each other. So, I mean, some examples here. If your aim is to move towards a paperless office, then there's no point having an objective that looks at maybe increasing recycling, like the weight of recycling, especially if it is focused on paper. Other ones, this is actually a real example that I was made aware of, but it was an organisation that was looking to install solar PV, but one of their main aims that they were looking to install solar PV for was because they had an objective in their policy to reduce energy consumption. But what we had to explain to them was it's not actually going to reduce their energy consumption, it's going to reduce their energy costs, and it's going to reduce their carbon footprint, but they're still going to be consuming the same energy, albeit they're going to be producing that energy. But it's just things to think about when when you are trying to link your aims and objectives, to make sure that they are helping each other and not hindering. And the last one in the SMART targets is time bound, and in my opinion this is kind of a two-tier one, because you need to have the date that it's achievable for, but you also need to have, or you need to choose what baseline date and baseline data you're using. So again, make sure that the time that you're setting to achieve it is achievable, and you can have everything in place and make sure, but also make sure that you're using dates and data that you're happy with as your baseline. So an example here would be reduce your carbon footprint by 5% by, say, 2016. But that doesn't mean anything unless you have that baseline data. So you would say using 2010 data as baseline, and then that makes sure that it's time bound in the two areas. So some examples here of objectives, good and bad. Reduce electricity usage by 5%. Again, it doesn't really have all the information that is required. Reduce waste to landfill by December 2015. Again, it's a bit better, but it doesn't have the baseline data. So some good targets we've got as the last two. Reduce weight of paper used by 20% by December 2015 on 2013-14 levels, and reduce water consumption by 100 metres cubed per 1,000 £1,000 of turnover, and that's from data from April 2015 to 16. So again, some smart objectives that you can use and tweak when you're putting together your environmental policy. And like we were discussing in one of the questions, the Resource Efficient Scotland website does have some example policies, even just to have a look at to see how things are set out. I'm not entirely sure that these are specifically SMART targets on them, but again, it's still got the layout and to show an example for you. So that link will be getting sent out, I think, with the webinar, and you can access the page. So once you've got your environmental policy completed, basically what do you want to do with it, or what do you require to do with it next? So make sure it's documented, it's, if anything that you need to implement that's included in your environmental policy is underway, and make sure there's some kind of system in place to maintain it, whether it is look at it annually or biannually, and also make sure that it is signed and dated by a member of senior management, even if it's just to maybe get them more involved in the whole process as well, because you will have put it past them, but it's maybe to get that more buy-in as well. Make sure your environmental policy is communicated to all your staff, all employees in the organisation, and also it's available to the public. So we've come across quite a few organisations that have maybe got, or have maybe done an environmental policy, but they've not really went any further with it. They've not put it up in their reception, they've not put it on their website. They maybe can still say, or they can tick that box on a tender that they do have it, but they're not making it publicly available, which we'll always recommend. And make sure there is a controlled copy and it is saved somewhere that you can either update or access if required. And I also mentioned environmental management systems at the beginning. So if you think environmental management systems is possibly the next step after you've updated or created your environmental policy, then gives you a way that you can go into things in a wee bit more detail. So that's the information about aspects and impacts, that'll really help you start off your environmental management system, and it is almost just a sort of formalised set of checklists. It includes all your environmental credentials, anything that you've got to do in a periodic time. It's a very beneficial system to put in place, but it's not always relevant for the majority for certain organisations. The benefits from it surround sort of that kind of increased compliance. You've got everything documented, so that information is there if required. It does help for tenders and for working with other organisations if you can show that you have got your EMS in place and it is up to date, and subsequently you can actually find cost savings from putting an environmental management system in place, because it will highlight areas that you could save money, whether it's through reducing your energy use, or maybe getting a better recycling system in place. And that's through, it's almost through being extra compliant that you can find cost savings, so that there is these improvements and savings that can come from putting in an environmental management system. And then again, the next step is whether you want to make it accredited or not. As I mentioned before as well, it is time consuming, it is costly, but there is standards out there. So there's ISO 14001, which is more of the bulk compliance, and then there's EMAS, which breaks it down into smaller chunks, so that's what the majority of smaller organisations will go for. But with your environmental policy, you do have the sort of beginnings of your environmental management system, so it definitely is doable if you are thinking about it. And as I said as well, the aspects and impacts is a key step in the development, because within your environmental management system there is the aspects and impacts register, which is one of your checklists that you go through periodically to make sure that things are in place. And what we've also got on the Resource Efficient Scotland website is a Zero Waste Scotland guide, and it's the EMS building blocks. And this guide it's really very good at going into things in step-by-step detail of what you actually need to do to create your own environmental management system. So if you are thinking about it, I would recommend going on and downloading that guide, because it's very helpful.
I can share that link with the email as follow-up as well.
That would be good, yeah. And this is just some more information from the Resource Efficient Scotland website of basically the majority of the information that we've discussed today is on that page through guides, checklists, and if you want any further information, I think that link will be getting shared as well with you, so you can access that.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks Emma. So I'll just take a couple of questions now before we kind of start to wrap things up. We've got a couple have come in. First one is someone saying that they work in a small office but they find it difficult to highlight the kind of the impacts that they're having, and perhaps now what you've touched on is calling aspects. So what kind of advice would you give to them?
It's definitely not as straightforward to... It's more the easy ones, that's the thing, but it's not as straightforward as, say, like a manufacturing factory where the aspects and impacts are highlighted to you on a day-to-day basis. But if you just think, what actually occurs in your office on a standard day, or even just the simple things like the use of the printer or your waste, or actually just your reducing your electricity or your energy usage, then you will start to build up what you can count as aspects and impacts.
Brilliant. Someone's asking, they're struggling to get senior managers on board with the development of an environmental policy, and just really what would you recommend to help them get those senior managers bought in?
So if they're not involved from the start, or if they are struggling, then I would say maybe like highlight the benefits to them. So that would be sort of, it's increasingly requested in tenders, it's increasingly requested by customers, and see if that maybe helps them. Also the compliance side and the cost savings, but I know, Lindsay, you've done some work with sort of senior management in the past, and we've got a template presentation, I think, as well.
Yeah, so from a communications point of view, I've done some work with engaging staff and senior managers. So we've got a template presentation which we can issue to organisations, which they can use to deliver to senior managers, and it's really just showing the kind of compelling argument to being more resource efficient, and that obviously links on to the importance of environmental policy. So I'm happy to share that presentation as well, so that might be useful to help you, get your senior managers bought into the importance of it, and why they should really be on board with a policy as well.
Good.
And then the last question we've probably got time for is someone's just asking where they could get more information on benchmarking.
Yeah, so the I think the energy one that I had up on the slide, that's actually from a SIBSE document, and it just shows different types of buildings, and I think that one is per metre squared. So again, you can compare your energy usage to a similar sized office. And I'm sure in that one as well, it's got like good practice, best practice, so it will help to show what you're aiming for as well. In terms of other benchmarks, we've got information for like water and paper use. For water, it's about 25 litres per person per day in a standard office, if you don't have a catering facility. So all these information, it just helps if you are setting targets.
Okay. Excellent. So yeah, if there's any specific questions, you might be best to just ask Resource Efficient Scotland live chat, or through the website, and we'll be able to help you with those. Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly talk to you just about a couple of things which might help you if you are starting out, really, you don't have a policy in place and you're not really sure where you might want to target savings and aims and objectives in your organisation. We've got a tool called the Savings Finder, which is an online resource kind of action planning tool, and it's quite a simple tool. You basically just go online, answer some simple questions. It takes around 3 to 5 minutes depending on which sections you kind of answer and which you don't, and it's just some simple questions around your energy, waste, water and raw material usage, and as a result of answering those questions, it will generate a bespoke report for you. And now what that will do is actually highlight some of the areas that you can start to make improvements. So that might really quickly highlight where you want to focus your aims and objectives for an environmental policy. So it really could help fast track getting that finished document. So I would advise you to kind of go onto the Resource Efficient Scotland website and take a look at the Savings Finder. It's a really quick, simple tool to use. And if after that you do want to kind of progress your knowledge a little bit further, we've got an e-learning programme which is the Green Champions training, and it's a resource that you can access at any time. You can do maybe a module, a lunchtime module a week, really at your own pace, and at the end of that you'll receive a Green Champions training certificate, so it's great for your CV and also just to demonstrate that how committed you are to resource efficiency, and we've had really fantastic feedback from the people that have used that tool and really upped their skills as a result. So it's fantastic, and yeah, I would just go onto the website and take a look at that if you get a chance. And finally, it's just for me to say that we offer one-to-one support for all organisations in Scotland. So if you're struggling with anything and you really want some more help, then don't hesitate to reach out to us for anything to do with resource efficiency. Whether you've got a really specific issue that you want to have a telephone call with one of our advisors that have expert knowledge in that area, or whether you're really kind of lost on where you want to start and you just want a general audit to see where you can start making savings, then we can help with all of those things. So you can either reach out to us on our contact form on the website, which is on screen there, just resourceefficientscotland.com, or you can give our helpline a call on 0800 808 2268, and all of our advisors are there really ready to help. So it's a free service, so I don't see any reason why you shouldn't, grab that with both hands. So that's it from me really. I've got one quick thing, is just to ask everybody whether or not you're interested in receiving one-to-one support from Resource Efficient Scotland. So that should be coming on screen now. If you'd like to complete that, then after the webinar we'll be able to reach out to you and ask where we can start helping you with anything that you need help with. So if you just complete that, and that'll give us a steer on who wants to be contacted by us for some more support. So I think most people have completed that now, just there's still a couple more coming in. Yeah. So I'll close that there. I don't need to share those results with you, but I've got a note of that so we can follow up with anyone that wants that support. So just before we wrap up, I'll hand you back over to Fran, who's just going to say a couple of things, and then that'll wrap everything up for today. So Fran, over to you.
Thanks, Lindsay. A big thank you to Emma for sharing in part her wealth of knowledge today. I found that session really useful, and I'm absolutely sure you did too. So feel free to drop a wee note to us. Let's have your feedback at the www.sdpscotland.co.uk. It'd be great to hear from you. It would also be good to find out what support you need, when you would best like to receive the training, and what method you prefer to be trained, whether it's digitally or face-to-face. I've made a wee note of a few training sessions that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. They're all on our website. They're within the calendar area of the website, but we have Tender Portals Made Easy in Fife on the 16th of April. We have Maximising Your Tender Score on the 21st of April, and in Glasgow on the 19th of May there is Value Add and Innovation, which will explain more about community benefits, and South Lanarkshire has Expanding Your Procurement Horizons. So feel free to drop into any of these sessions that we're running. The aim of STP is to level the playing field when you're bidding for contracts. So we want you to be able to bid and win for public sector work. But thank you very much for attending us today. I'm going to hand you back to Lindsay just to close off today's session. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it everyone. That's everything we've got to discuss with you today. We hope that you've enjoyed the session. There's so much support out there from both Resource Efficient Scotland and from supplier development programmes, so utilise everything you can, and we hope to see you at one of the STP or the Resource Efficient Scotland events soon. So thanks again, take care, and I'll share all the information with you in the next few days. Thanks everyone.